everyone, Seven Sparrows here, ready to continue our journey. I wanted to share a rather recent epiphany I've had, which came straight from the creator, I'm sure, so I sincerely thank him for that. Research is one of those things that seems to have a pattern of the golden ratio spiral, if you will. I know for me, I tend to cycle through previous topics I'd researched in the past to see if there's anything new, for one, and for two, to see if there's anything I totally missed before. You'll have to forgive me if you hear the heater going on in the background today. It's a little chillier than usual. Now, one of these cycled topics is that of the Sasquatch or Bigfoot or ape men. In the conspiracy universe, this is definitely one of those topics that are somewhat accepted to be true, so it's somewhat brushed off and not even really scrutinized beyond the whole trying to catch the $1 million evidence thing. Lately, I ran across a Sasquatch researcher named Scott Carpenter. Not only is his scriptural perspective on the Sasquatch refreshing, his methods on capturing footage of the creatures actually work. The idea to put a camera on his back to film behind him is absolutely genius. Definitely not for the faint of heart. I know I'd rather not know what mythical creature could potentially be lurking behind me on a trail, or maybe I would. Clearly, there is quite the proficient effort by the quote-unquote authorities to purposely ignore the evidence for these creatures for decades. And the question is, why? As I always say, I am the least of these. I am just a voice in the wind, truly happy to be worth 7 sparrows in Yahweh's eyes. Nothing I say is intended to tear anyone down, nor build myself up in any way. However large or small, we all have something to bring to the table. That being said, while Mr. Carpenter's theory that the Sasquatch are Nephilim hybrids due to the DNA data coming back as being unknown male and human female, this is indeed a valiant attempt to reconcile evidence with scriptural truth. Even most of Christianity would prefer to ignore these topics. But one must ask the question, if all the Sasquatches are a result of the intermarrying between Nephilim and human women, why is it that these creatures only look like an ape humanoid? There seems to be a lack of evidence when it comes to any folklore or scriptures that indicate that looking like apes is a result of this hybridization between fallen angel DNA and human women DNA. While of course an upgrade in size and strength would probably automatically be expected across the board, why do the Sasquatch all look like apes? So to answer this, I would like to humbly put forth a separate potential possibility on the identity of who these ape men could really be. The Book of Jasher, among many other books which have been conveniently amputated from being considered quote-unquote official and approved, its veracity has indeed been established by being quoted by pretty key scriptural figures, as if it is an accepted fact that Jasher was actually read and studied by those in King David's time and even before that during Joshua's time. And these are the references that they are mentioned. Hence, Jasher has to be quite the ancient writing, and I have to add an epic one at that. If you want to see the scriptural heroes we all know to be portrayed in an almost superhero-like presentation, you have to read Jasher. It will change your world. Now, in Jasher 9 is described in better detail what exactly happened to all those involved in building the Tower of Babel. While everyone knows that the languages were confused and that the Tower of Babel was destroyed, note here, it was mostly destroyed, as the top part was left partially buried, but still visible. I have a theory addressing where this location could be, and that video will be linked below. It appears by excluding Jasher from approved reading, we miss some critical context on what exactly happened to the inhabitants who built the Tower of Babel. The group who worked on the tower was divided into thirds. While a third were killed on the spot by their own brethren, flustered by their co-workers suddenly speaking gibberish, the second third survived and had to live on with the confusing of languages. So this group is essentially us, right? and the last third had another rather unique curse placed upon them. Here we will quote verse 35 of Jasher 9. And Yahweh smote the 3 divisions that were there, and he punished them according to their works and designs. Those who said, we will ascend to heaven and serve our gods, became like apes and elephants. How is this not scriptural evidence for the Sasquatch? And also the more elusive Darrow. I know we are missing the second witness of scripture, but surely the physical reality can almost serve as a second witness with the myriad of sightings all around the world. While the Darrow encounters have definitely been more rare, they do seem to be seen predominantly in India culture, though that could be corrected perhaps. But the Sasquatch, for sure, has seemed to more successfully permeate the memories and lore of people from ancient times, matching the criteria that Sasquatch has been around for a long time, as they would be if they were indeed created at the fall of the Tower of Babel. This scenario would surely account for the incredibly high number of encounters, as these creatures did live on from the exact same ground zero as the rest of us humans. Being that Sasquatch accounted for a third of the company at the Tower of Babel, the population numbers should be significant enough to account for the many number of sightings. Now, of course, this number of population would be split in half between the Darrow, potentially, right? Now, I don't at all believe that there are almost 9 billion people in the world, at least not anymore. But assuming that number was legit, even if we were super conservative and assume there are perhaps between, 3 to 4.5 billion Sasquatch out there, that's still quite the number. On this train of thought, Scott Carpenter has made an excellent observation that the differences in the appearance of the Sasquatch show genetic diversity, basically meaning that there appears to be every race represented in the Sasquatch people, with the full array of skin color, hair color, eye color, facial proportion variations, as in, racial variations that are present in humans as well. Now, if the Sasquatch were a result of the aftermath of the Tower of Babel, just as we saw in Jasher, the people after Noah's flood did not scatter into the earth as Yahweh commanded. Therefore, the Tower of Babel population contained every race of humanity in one location. And this is an entirely plausible answer to the Sasquatch showing genetic diversity. To collaborate this thought with my what if the Mappa Mundi is the true map of the world theory, the video is linked below. Notice on the North American map of Sasquatch sightings, not only is the USA absolutely dense with Sasquatch sightings, there is a severe lack of Sasquatch sightings in the Middle East, where the Tower of Babel supposedly was on the Mercator map. The second severe discrepancy is that they have no logical explanation why the United States has such a concentrated number of sightings compared to most other places. Now, if quote-unquote America is actually the ancient land of Canaan, as I theorize, the Sasquatch map makes absolute total sense, especially if the Tower of Babel was over here. So where could the remnant of the Tower of Babel be? Hidden in plain sight as the Grand Mesa tabletop, the top of which is actually a scary match for how large the top portion of the Tower of Babel should have been, as it is described in Jasher. And again, this is discussed in greater detail in my previous video. Notice the area surrounding the Grand Mesa tabletop is absolutely void of Sasquatch sightings in a rather curious circular pattern. While definitely it could just mean that no one has happened upon a Sasquatch in this area, could it quite possibly mean that the area became to be believed as cursed by the Sasquatch population? Hence, the subsequent avoidance of this area has been passed down throughout their generations. I have to say here that this area at the western edge of Colorado is conveniently surrounded by absolutely massive plains, which would match the scriptural description of the plains of Shinar. The idea that America, quote unquote, is just a mask over the land that is and always was the true land of Canaan is part of another theory I am working on called the giant theme park theory. It may sound outrageous at first, but there are so many coincidences that support this thought you will eventually struggle holding all of them in your arms. Just to name a few of these that are conveniently ignored by the authorities. 1. Evidence of Alexander the Great's tomb in the state of Illinois. 2. The Great Salt Lake matches ancient historian Josephus' accounts of how big the Dead Sea measured compared to the woefully inadequate theme park one. Not only does this Great Salt Lake, potentially the true Dead Sea, have its entire west side off limits to us sheeple, convenient military zone excuses that spans areas so big they would entirely envelop some of the smaller United States. Also to mention here, the Great Salt Lake has the slime pits, the fake one is missing, and the distinctive red colors of the Great Salt Lake is due to the presence of a large amount of iron oxide. Likely would be a result of the Sodom and Gomorrah destruction with all of the blood and all of the wars that happened in that area. 3. There is literally a Jordan River connecting the Great Salt Lake to Utah Lake, potentially the true Sea of Galilee. 4. Moab was potentially where the Moabites lived. 5. Ogden, the home of the giant Og who Joshua fought, just so happens to be perfectly in the vicinity. 6. The Mormon Salt Lake Temple near the Great Salt Lake coincidentally has a statue of an unknown woman in their great temple, venerated with even the shell of Isis behind her. I have a video on this as well, analyzing the many nooks and crannies on who this woman could have been, how I came across her while searching for images of salt statues, and I am definitely throwing out there that she was potentially Lot's wife. 7. Another Mormon temple, not too far to the south of the one I just mentioned, is called the Jordan River Temple, with a very special baptism basin built there, probably over the exact spot John the Baptist baptized Yahusha. There are many more details, such as certain mountain ranges that obviously the enemy can't exactly move in their entirety, but they just happen to portray quote-unquote new world locations in the old world in an overlapping kind of pattern. And you'll just have to check that out if that kind of thing interests you. I am trying to keep this short, but since I haven't put out a research video up for a while, maybe it's okay. I have to note here, I know the Mormons are coming up quite frequently lately, and I just wanted to address it real quick since I make videos very rarely. The Book of Mormon has absolutely nothing to do with the Mormonism cult whatsoever. After reading it without bias, I truly believe they taped it off with a big fat yellow tape, "Caution, cult," to keep 99% of people from even considering to read it, because it is the most messianic writing that intertwines or marries the concept of keeping the commandments of Yahweh and the need for a Messiah together so well that had they tried to surgically amputate them apart, there would be nothing left of the Book of Mormon. Now, I will quickly prove without a doubt that the Book of Mormon is actually anti-Mormonism. Even though Mormonism is one of the most pro-polygamy religions on earth, the Book of Mormon is the one book that actually says verbatim that Yahweh considers polygamy an abomination that David and Solomon erred in, and that Yahweh's people should not walk in the way of those of old, that a man should have one wife and concubines he should have none. A few critical verses from Jacob chapter 2 from the Book of Mormon, and the words in brackets are mine for emphasis and illustration. And we'll start in verse 22. "And now I make an end of speaking unto you concerning this pride, and were it not that I must speak unto you concerning a grosser crime," meaning that whatever he is about to address next is worse than the sin of pride, which is pretty substantial, "my heart would rejoice exceedingly because of you. But the word of Elohim burdens me because of your grosser crimes. For behold, thus saith Yahweh, this people began to wax in iniquity. They understand not the scriptures, for they seek to excuse themselves in committing whoredoms, because of the things which were written concerning David and Solomon his son." Behold, David and Solomon truly had many wives and concubines, which thing was abominable before me, saith Yahweh. Wherefore, thus saith Yahweh, I have led this people forth out of the land of Jerusalem by the power of mine arm, that I might raise up unto me a righteous branch from the fruit of the loins of Joseph. Wherefore I, Yahweh Elohim, will not suffer that this people shall do like unto them of old. So it does appear that Yahweh wants to do a do-over, especially concerning this particular sin. Here's the main point of the whole passage. Wherefore, my brethren, hear me and hearken to the word of Yahweh. For there shall not any man among you have, save it be one wife, and concubines he shall have none.
I'm so far from home, so far from home. Not where I belong, not where I belong. I'm so far from home, so far from home.
For if I will, saith Yahweh of hosts, raise up seed unto me, I will command my people. Otherwise they shall hearken unto these things. Meaning that if Yahweh doesn't intervene on the behalf of everyone, that this behavior is the tendency of people. For behold, I, Yahweh, have seen the sorrow and heard the mourning of the daughters of my people in the land of Jerusalem, yea, in all the lands of my people, because of the wickedness and abominations of their husbands. Now, there are individuals and groups, even in the Messianic movement, that are trying to normalize the concept of polygamy by basically making the case that the male cannot commit adultery, which by this passage we just read is not the case. These lust-filled men give themselves away with their constant insistence on using the word polygyny, illustrating via semantics the true desires of their hearts, claiming that they are literally fulfilling Yahweh's will by spreading the seed of Abraham physically, not realizing that this would turn the truth into a sex cult. Even in Ecclesiasticus, it states that it is better to have one righteous child than many sinful ones, and better to have no children than have even one that is unrighteous. It is actually an undisputed fact that the polygamous society promotes violence and crime, because as women gravitate towards the one male that might be the kingpin, the other males that don't end up getting to marry anyone or have a family end up kind of becoming dangerous peoples because they have nothing to do with their lives. Despite the fact that if we are to see marriage as Yahweh sees it via the laws written in Exodus 21, sex essentially equals an act of marriage, which requires the man to go to the father of the daughter and pay him a nice dowry to get to marry his daughter. Now, with this perspective in mind, with the free sex society we currently live in, one can easily make the claim that we potentially live in one of the most polygamous societies ever and are hereby reaping the curses that come along with it. If this polygamy truth, quote unquote, has been wrongfully withheld from the people, why is it stated verbatim in the main writings of one of the most pro-polygamy religions on earth that the righteous are to have one wife and concubines he shall have none? And just a few more verses here. And I will not suffer, says Yahweh of hosts, that the cries of the fair daughters of this people, which I have led out of the land of Jerusalem, shall come up unto me against the men of my people, saith Yahweh of hosts. For they shall not lead away captive the daughters of my people because of their tenderness, save I shall visit them with a sore curse, even unto destruction. For they shall not commit whoredoms like unto them of old, saith Yahweh of hosts. There is a bit of a follow-up on this concept in Jacob chapter 3, where it states that even though the Lamanites, the wicked brethren of the initially righteous group, the Nephites, have been overall more wicked than the Nephites, that because they did uphold this commandment of monogamy, that there was actual love between the husband and wife, hence there was actual love towards their children, that they will be saved from annihilation in the end. So perhaps it can rather conclusively be stated that the Mormons don't really read their scriptures, much like it seems mainstream Christians don't really read most of their scriptures. And this isn't to knock on anyone, because I know I used to not read at all either. How is it that they can build a cult and claim that they use the Book of Mormon for its foundation when this book clearly absolutely contradicts the crux of their religion? I will do another video on the Book of Mormon, but I take too long to make videos as it is, so I just had to release this into the digital universe so that the butterfly effect could take it wherever it needs to. Because, no, I do think the details on how the Book of Mormon came about is mostly fabricated, because the whole thing reads entirely differently than the other smaller books Mormonism likes to use. We must remember that all of history appears to be portrayed to us as a bundle of lies. We must ignore their crockery and the noisy chatter and just start with what we know to truly piece together what really happened. Anyway, I'm sure some of you are thinking, can we stay on topic, Sparrow? Why do we have to get into all this map stuff right now? As usual, I am more of the bird's eye view type of mind, and the big picture approach when considering the true Mappamundi perspective would really help account for answering some questions. An important one being, why does the USA have an overwhelmingly dense population of Sasquatch? Not only does the theme park Israel have relatively few sightings of Sasquatch in comparison, considering it's supposedly an ancient location, they don't even have a legitimate, believable theme park suggestion of where the Tower of Babel was, as it was not just blown away into the wind, and part of the tower was left standing, according to Jasher. To go along with the giant theme park theory, notice that they need to mark every quote-unquote esteemed location with signs. Lately, I've been thinking that most biblically significant locations probably don't even need signs to tell you it's significant, because you can definitely just feel it as you are in that location. It is currently a very fitting happenstance that the Tower of Babel event went down at the Grand Mesa tabletop, as it is in a city that just so happens to be called Grand Junction, Colorado. Notice they're almost telling this literally to our faces via the words Grand Junction, i.e. the great turning point. It is no doubt the Tower of Babel was one of the greatest turning points in all history, right? Especially after the flood. I just have a feeling that it's always been about this land, quote unquote America, which is just a mask that has been put over the land that is and always was Canaan. Because if it's a land important to Yahweh, the devil most definitely wants it too. But you know what? The covenant was not given to him, it was given to us forever. And as far as I'm aware, forever includes even now. Recently, I have listened to hours and hours of Sasquatch accounts, and the common threads and takeaways I've noticed is that 1, most of the time, the Sasquatch do not actually harm the human individual unless the human draws it upon himself by blatant stupidity or true injustice to the Sasquatch, as would the natural response be from even humans if you were to invade their private properties with fire sticks and trying to get evidence of them on camera. And 2, the overwhelming claims by most who have encountered the Sasquatch that they are not only intelligent but also overwhelmingly human. If these creatures are able to feel empathy, compassion, understand the concept of monogamy as some research have suggested, they have their own culture and language, and also seemingly have portrayed the ability to understand morality, would this not mean that they are inherently human? Scott Carpenter mentioned he was gifted a branch of a natural bug repellent when it was apparent his pre-applied bug repellent before his hike had washed away with sweat, illustrating the capacity for compassion and to be able to act on it productively. There are also cases of Sasquatch intervening to help children in abusive and dangerous situations, as well as help the elderly with homestead chores. Some human women were even protected from being raped by a male Sasquatch, a female Sasquatch stepping in just in time to give the male a severe tongue lashing and let the human women escape. Who knows if the reprimand was, "Hey, you know you are not to breed with their kind," or "Hey, I caught you with what you were trying to do, you cheater, she's even married." Who knows what the words they spoke really meant. But clearly the Sasquatch encounters reveal a depth to these cursed humans that would not be expected from a baseline animal, especially in the second sexual arena. So what is the unique difference between human and animal? I would argue the ability to have a concept beyond basic primal physical instinct. So the ability to not be selfish, lustful, envious. So basically the laws of life of the creator. Now on the opposite end of this concept, it is not unheard that they have also kidnapped people and also have been known to have a fairly grotesque way of killing livestock to eat them. So considering the potential range and behavior would implicate that Sasquatches can be expected to have the full spectrum of behaviors one might expect from humans. There are very likely good and bad Sasquatches, just as there are good and bad humans. To kind of punch this thought home, one particular account really blew my mind. A woman who has had extensive encounters with Sasquatch actually made the statement she believes they are spiritual. Near her house, they had a meeting place where they gathered at night, and eventually she would hear them making sounds like what she called chanting, which was very likely praying, right? Because she said that it made the area feel very peaceful, quote, almost like you were at church. And when she asked one of them what they were doing, they told her that they answered to Creator just like we humans answer to God. Just absolutely incredible. What a monumental statement. So if all this mentioned above is true, it really does appear that the Sasquatch has not only a subconscious understanding of the Creator's laws of life, but the aspect of having a relationship with him is known by them as well. I know I used to think that maybe they are a government experiment gone awry. The main reason that the Sasquatch is most likely not a result of an experiment is that the protection mechanism Yahweh has put in place still works. So even a more genetically similar pairing of, say, a lion and tiger, or even a donkey and horse, these hybrids are more often than not sterile. We are likely seeing an evidence of this in humanity as well. Sterilization as a result of GMO foods, and even more accelerated recently via the snake bites that were rolled out on a massive scale. Mixing kinds always seem to result in infertility. So, even that step might be taken and some kind of abomination happens. That abomination usually cannot reproduce. But there is an aspect to this humanoid phenomenon that is not so widely considered, and we need to ask ourselves the question, would infertility be the result if Yahweh was the cause of a physically disfiguring curse? Even when it comes to other cryptids, such as Dogman for example, while data on them are more scarce compared to their Sasquatch counterpart, it seems to still reflect the same full spectrum range of moral and immoral behavior as the Sasquatch, albeit people do seem to fear Dogmen more, perhaps because of their mouthful of super sharp teeth. There's one person's account in particular that seems to imply Dogmen not only understand more abstract concepts of, like, say, monogamy or having a family, and potentially even understand morality and refraining from committing murder, their babies have been seen, so clearly they can reproduce. If they are truly the result of the mixing of kinds, this would not be the case, as we have already mentioned that a consequence of mixing kinds is infertility, even when the genetics are rather close. However, if they are cursed humans, their entire lineage and generations doomed to live in the shapes they are in because of the graveness of their ancestors' sins, even though they are still human. Now that is quite the intriguing thought, and perhaps gives a whole new meaning to Mark 16:15, where it says to preach the gospel to every creature. Now, I know you are naturally asking or thinking, Sparrow, what about the fallen angels mating with the woman thing then? In one piece of ancient writing, it is stated that the fallen ones who mated with human women had transformed their angelic forms into a human to commit their deeds. Once they had completed the sex act, they were unable to change back. Since they had shape-shifted into humans or perhaps possessed a human vessel to commit their crimes, maybe this didn't trip the infertility wire. Or, if the former didn't happen that way, because the second witness is missing, and the angels kept their form to commit their act, could this mean that the fallen angels, or even angels as a whole, while they are not exactly human as we are, that they are actually a version of human? The key consideration is that their interaction with human women did result in those women becoming pregnant and giving birth. And those children also had children after that too, right? So the subsequent pattern of being able to reproduce was not halted by the tripping of the infertility wire. And we're not even talking 7 to 13 foot tall giants. Kent Hovind's research has shown that potentially even Noah and his sons would have been considered giants in that range, especially by today's standards. When we say giants, we're talking titans, like Attack on Titan, the anime style, though probably with skin. Now, even after the flood, clearly the Nephilim gene lived on, right? Maybe through Noah's sons' wives or a second incursion, or, I don't really have a position on that perspective right now. But clearly, though, not to pick on Mr. Carpenter, of course, but the evidence of the Nephilim or giant looking like apes is not a given at all. Now, is it possible that some Sasquatch have mated with leftover Nephilim that survived the flood in a deep cave somewhere? Of course, these could perhaps account for the super large Sasquatch that have been seen towards the north. And notice, whenever cannibalism or lack of compassion comes on the scene, there does seem to be at least a residue of the fallen angel connection, whether physically, spiritually, or both. This entire concept brings into the light a very grim possibility. And sorry, my heater's kicking on again. That it is possible to reap a serious curse during the physical experience, even before Judgment Day. And how serious does that sound, right? Is it possible to commit sins serious enough that could incur a severe added curse from the Most High? Now, this concept has actually been alluded to in cultures all around the world, even in modern culture. An obvious physical change that appears to be the heavier consequence of heavier sins. I was listening to the purported Ohio recordings of Sasquatch howling into the night, and I couldn't help but notice the very human edge to the voice, the emotion of which to me comes across as if they are in deep sorrow. I can only imagine the anguish it must feel to be in such a form and knowing that your children are doomed to be the same also. The concept that terrible sins equal being transformed or cursed into an animal are rife within the human psyche. And here are a few examples. 1. The women who end up being the spouses of the fallen angels eventually became the sirens. Now, it is certainly up for question whether there were only 200 of these women or more. As far as I am aware, it appears that sirens and mermaids might be different things. 2. The stigma that witches will turn people, if they are bad, into different animals echo the pattern. 3. In the story of Pinocchio, at least Disney's portrayal of it, Pinocchio and others are tricked and kidnapped into going to Pleasure Island, where all little boys can be as bad as they want, not knowing that there is a heavy price, a curse that turns them into donkeys that can only be reversed by a stronger act of good, such as self-sacrifice. 4. In Beauty and the Beast is also a similar pattern. The man who is turned into the beast has earned this condition because of his rude and inconsiderate behavior towards an elderly woman who needs shelter from the bitter cold, which turns out to be a type of moral test for the man, clearly, which he fails, and hence he is turned into a beast. And similar to the Pinocchio story, the only redemption for him is a fight to the death or self-sacrifice. Notice in all examples above, the cursed subject is almost always a man, the initial cursed subject. While there are reports of female versions of all cryptids, it does make you wonder if the initial curse, say after the Tower of Babel incident, happened only to the men at first. Why? Stories of these humanoids having attraction to human women is overwhelmingly abundant. 2 already mentioned above, Shrek, yet another being King Kong. I know, he's not necessarily a Sasquatch, but definitely definitely a very anthropomorphized ape. Now, could these be allusions to the men having to go back to their families after the last day working on the Tower of Babel and having to pick up the pieces of their lives and continuing on, trying to get their women to understand, hey, it's me, do you or could you still love me? In that situation, most women probably would have had no choice but to accept the new forms of their husbands and continue living on, especially after such a great turning point that affected everyone, and especially without Big Brother in the picture like we've got today. This is obviously just my opinion, but generally speaking, we as women have forgotten how tough life could be in a more rugged atmosphere that is untouched by the conveniences of modern day living. Having to live in nature regularly enforces this reality. A series done by Bear Grylls or Gillis, or I'm not sure how to exactly pronounce his name, but a series he made called The Island surprisingly honestly showed this reality for I think 2 seasons before they realized an all-women team versus an all-men team usually results in a landslide win for the men. The irony is that even human men and women have their own level of curses to deal with thanks to the fall of mankind, not just Sasquatches and dogmen who just so happen to have earned another level of a curse beyond what humans were originally given. While having children of both genders from this aftermath would have been a natural result, being that the father was clearly heavily cursed, wouldn't this dynamic potentially account for the quote-unquote more human-looking Sasquatch versus the more ape-looking Sasquatch? Though clearly the curse cannot exactly be undone. With the element of selflessness equaling a redemption, is it possible the more human-looking ones have a higher quote-unquote genetic memory of following Yahweh's law? And I mean the Sasquatch here. Can their preceding generations become more in line with Yahweh? Hence, they can reduce the effect of sin in their lives and in their children's lives. I mean, we know this pattern is true when it concerns health and overall behavior, in us as well. Can they make a difference on the epic chessboard of this existence? This monumental war between good and evil. If they repent and fight for Yahweh, similar to epic movies such as Lord of the Rings or the Chronicles of Narnia, where many abnormal creatures per se can join the race of men, the sons of Adam and the daughters of Eve, in the battle for good and evil. I'm sure you all know what I want to think. But recently I learned about the Gugwe or Gugwe. I'm not sure which one is the official name, but apparently while they are a branch of Sasquatch, humanoid as well, they have a very ape-like face with a protruding snout, a very large cone head, apparently very tall, more densely covered in hair, and a mouthful of super sharp teeth compared to their quote-unquote regular Sasquatch counterparts. Their inability to communicate and tendency to be extremely violent and dangerous are hallmark traits. Are these the remnant of the Sasquatch population who ignored the concept of being human human and embrace their animal side, which is what the enemy is trying to get even humans to do, right? So they are essentially eventually given over to a callous, reprobate mind, similar to how certain Native American tribes we know as quote-unquote good caretakers of all creation. Clearly there were also tribes who embraced cannibalism and human sacrifice as well. While not being able to be in the original image of Yahweh is, I'm sure, quite the downside, the curses are not without their perks. The cryptids' abilities to be able to live in the elements, as well as an upgrade to their physical strength and stealth abilities, are clearly things desirable by even the powers that be. Perhaps this could potentially account for one of their reasons for constantly wanting to know new locations of these creatures, i.e. humans, right? Which leads me to my next point. And we're going to try to answer the question why there are paranormal phenomenon often experienced following cryptid, especially Sasquatch encounters. Many people who have encountered both Sasquatch and Dogman have stated that many times there are other paranormal phenomenon that occur at the same time or even after, such as certain lights they are seeing or aliens and demons. The humanity of these cursed humans is possibly what is coming into play here, and I will try to explain. While it is very likely that demonic possession could happen with animals or other forms of nature to meet some end, clearly it's always better for the enemy to possess a human, or at least a vessel with better capabilities. If it is indeed the case that these cryptids, i.e. cursed humans, and they are human, why wouldn't they be the target for demonic activity just as regular humans are, if not more? In the powers that be's desire to create abominations and super soldiers, why wouldn't they target these cursed humans, as their DNA are likely to mesh better with human DNA without tripping the infertility wire? Or is it that the powers that be don't want the Sasquatch to help out the human population? Clearly, the Sasquatch aren't going to need Walmart anytime soon and are incredibly self-sufficient. The critical account, unexpected answer to this question was of an elderly woman who lives in the woods who has known a band of Sasquatch for decades. She is even the tribe's nanny, it seems, as she would babysit the junior Sasquatches while the adults went to hunt, which is, incredible, I know. Not only did she know how to communicate with them, but she also knew more minute details about their culture and regular goings-ons. For example, the male Sasquatch need to go with the star people for a while when they are young adults. What a gem of a statement. Now let's ask our favorite question. Why? So they can be brainwashed with the false worldviews that are in line with the fallen one's agenda, maybe? So they can be experimented on, chipped, perhaps implanted with demons, and then released back into their tribes with more mental, emotional, spiritual anguish than they already have? I mean, why wouldn't the enemy want as much control over this group of people as possible, knowing that they are essentially the superhuman with perhaps a couple steps back in the aesthetic/hygiene department, but a physical upgrade nonetheless? So keeping this detail in mind, we have one more encounter to discuss. A certain Bigfoot researcher named Mark has an experience that changes his life and view of the topic forever. Long story short, along with Bigfoot Einstein, while he is on a vacation at a cabin, Mark encounters the dark entities, the hooded ring wraith type. The entity tells Mark that the whole Bigfoot phenomenon is to lure people in like him, who are ultimately prey, being primed for the kill like a cat toys with a mouse before killing it. Mark feels the entity essentially seeming to suck the life force from him through the heavy hands on his shoulders that is holding him down into his camping chair. And in Mark's mind, he screams to God for help. Suddenly, Mark hears what sounds like a large pop in his brain, as if something was broken for a moment. And Mark hears another voice, different than the entities, which tells him, run. Mark finds that he can get up, despite not being able to a second ago. And despite his age, he ran like hell was behind him, he says, which clearly it was, because the dark presence apparently made chase. Now, what totally threw me off guard was when Mark was talking about him and a fellow Bigfoot researcher, Chris, who would go deep into the swamps in Florida at dusk, looking for these Sasquatch creatures. Mark, Chris, and Chris's ladies, whether they are his wife, sister, or mom, I don't really know. But it is important to note that Chris and his family is currently not very spiritual, as they would say. But they all state that the more they progressed in searching for Bigfoot evidence, the more they started seeing dark, cloaked figures in their peripheral vision. Only that they would disappear when they would retrace their steps, though all of them were adamant that they saw these things. So these instances would amplify with time, eventually leading to the climax mentioned above for Mark. It is my humble opinion that these Bigfoot searches were starting to be carried out with, of course, excitement, but also likely fear, which seems to be a necessary ingredient when it comes to access by fallen entities. Notice the fear porn every night on TV, right? Beyond this, it just so happens to be a band of Bigfoot that were very likely brainwashed and utilized by the demonic forces. But just like not every human is demon possessed, not every Sasquatch is possessed. It is likely that the Sasquatch, being absolutely a physical entity, if there are those that appear to have supernatural abilities, like disappearing, or definitely bending the laws of nature beyond the physical, perhaps it is possible they were taught those things during their brainwashing or MK Ultra session, similar to how humans have been trained to do supernatural things as well. I mean, not everyone, but certain people definitely seem to experience unnatural phenomenon, either of their own doing or their ancestors doing, similar to how a witch or sorcerer would also break the laws of the physical dimension, right? If other phenomena are occurring with the Sasquatch, it is highly plausible that they have been tampered with. But surely Yahusha's blood is powerful enough to cure them too, right? At least of the demonic stuff. It probably won't cure them of their form because it's kind of a subsequent curse that they have to live with, similar to childbirth pains for women. Whether they love Yahweh or not, most women seem to still have to go through that, right? Similar to how most men still have to work to provide for their families, at least in the traditional structure. But just as their fallen one's secret covenant states, there are many genres and angles the enemy uses to attack humans, and this hobby, passion, or addiction of Sasquatch research, if left unchecked or done with the wrong intention, is just another genre of traps for the souls, especially the original images of Yahweh, perhaps. These hooded and cloaked entities do not only accompany Bigfoot encounters, they will come in anywhere there is an accessible doorway in the veil. And here's why. Mark, Chris, and his ladies all mention that when they see these dark entities, they are pixelated. Now, that statement by Mark just hit me like a ton of bricks. What if pixelation or pixels are the vehicles or mechanism that is utilized by the entities to gain access to this physical dimension? Or is the evidence of something passing through the veil? I'm sure some of you already know where I might be going with this, but let's carry on. Back in the day of my video gaming past, there was a particular game called Zelda Twilight Princess. It was definitely a pretty dark game compared to the other ones in the Zelda series, but let's face it, a lot of video games probably portray truth better than any quote-unquote official newsroom station anymore. In this game, I remember at key junctures there would be a portal that opens, and it would have a very pixelated appearance when it forms, then three disgusting looking demons resembling humanoid spiders or archons would fall out of the portal. Once these creatures are defeated, would turn back into pixel squares and get sucked back into the portal. So to add to this video game thought, there was another Mario game, somewhat recent, where it appears that Mario is able to travel from location to location via the electric grid. Not to mention, absolutely ages ago, Richie from Boston made an observation that circuits look like sigils, i.e. basically kanji symbols for witchcraft, created for the purpose of committing witchcraft. Again, the coincidences here are pretty remarkable, and the implications of what all this could mean is just so crazy, I can hardly contain myself. This is essentially the mechanism of what is making the personal-sized black mirrors we all carry, the TVs, laptop monitors, actually work. To embellish this idea with another detail, Scott Carpenter happened to catch a portal being formed behind him on one of his hikes. An amazing capture for sure, which shows a couple entities coming through it to boot. One looking totally like a Darrow. Absolutely incredible footage. Now, the kicker here is that he was too far to notice any pixelation, but the observation he made was that it's almost like the portal was a liquid of some kind because of how it distorted the trail behind the portal. I would theorize here that when the entities come through, perhaps they are just pixelated at first, but materialize into something more. Here we see the liquid and pixelation connection. And oh my goodness. So just how often do ads for TVs or monitor screens go on and on about having special liquidized crystal backgrounds? And aren't TVs all about pixels too? What about our phones, laptops, watches? I mean, the reality we live in is insane. And somehow I'm the crazy one because I might wear a crystal necklace sometimes. And somehow, supposedly that makes me a witch. Yet every good Christian believing they are abstaining from all things quote-unquote anti-God is carrying around an expertly crafted wizardry device in their pocket and use it every day to fulfill deeds that would have been deemed impossible unless one called it sorcery. With the amazing research by Shaking My Head Productions that the original TVs used to be round, we are all probably carrying around reshaped crystal balls that actually work. Not only can they show us things and let us talk to people on the other side of the world, we speak to it to turn off the lights and start the laundry, or to lower the house climate temperature, or change the cook time on the oven, give us directions where to go, when soccer practice is over to pick up the children. They even essentially plan our days for us. And something to remember is that the ancient crystal balls and scrying mirrors worked because they were spoken to and touched with the hands. I'm sorry, I'll try to calm down a little bit.
A Palantir is a dangerous tool, Solomon.
Why? Why should we fear to use it?
We do not know who else may be watching.
Are you mad? I just want to look at it. Just one more time. Put it back. Pippin.
Now, is it coincidence that Elon Spaceman is not only holding a wizard stuffed animal in the picture of him and his baby, or her baby, who knows anymore? He also expressed the most approval when someone asked the pronunciation of their baby name as Archangel, likely their favorite archangel, who is very likely also their phoenix they all want to rise again, to discuss what the name actually means. Not only do they acknowledge in the article that while AI does indeed mean artificial intelligence, it also means love in Japanese. While most of my quote-unquote formal education endeavors have been clearly a waste of time and money, not everything was lost, as my minor degrees were in linguistics and Greek. And note here, this doesn't mean I'm anything special. It's just that maybe I'll know how to use a couple extra tools in my back pocket. That's all it really means. But on this concept of languages and their exponential effects on reality, I do plan to diverge into more in the future. Essentially, words may not mean exactly what we, the peasants, assume they mean. For example, we all collectively think that the word independence means freedom. And of course, the digital dictionaries controlled and maintained by AI anymore, I'd imagine, will echo the same definition. However, if you look at the word and their phonemes and etymology, parts that make up the word at face value, Independence can also mean independence, as in being in a state of dependency. English is indeed the boss language of doublespeak. The potential we are saying the opposite of what we think we are saying is just so high. Another example of the face value aspect of words is even in the word definition, as mentioned already by other researchers, means essentially definition at face value. Our culture adds to this as well. These days, phrases that mean something negative on the surface are believed to mean something good. Break a leg, eat your heart out, sick, you beast. I mean, do we really want to be those things or want those things? We must ask ourselves, does a cultural deterioration caused by a people losing touch with their origins truly negate the original meaning of a phrase or word? I would personally assume no, especially if the power of life and death is in the tongue. We will use the same mindset in explaining what the words artificial intelligence could really mean. Using the face value glasses, let's look at artificial intelligence. Basically, both ancient and modern languages are meshed into something seemingly new. While most of us will take dictionary.com's definition of artificial as bottom line truth, by how this word sounds, we can also see and hear three words: art, I, official. Examining the word intelligence face value as well, intelligence could mean new knowledge or just knowledge in general, or smartness perhaps. It also has the word angel embedded in it backwards if you look here. Angel, right? I know, the EN isn't consistent in being backwards. In the universe of languages, while English and many other languages go from left to right, there are other languages that go from right to left. In the arena of quantum grammar, it's almost as if word order doesn't particularly matter as long as all the components are there in a segment. It might sound confusing, but it's really not. By how they are using language against us in this way, they are essentially trying to quote-unquote 5Dify language, if you will. They're trying to make it appear that they are inventing or creating a new language or something, but they're really not. A couple more components to round off the true definition of Mr. Spaceman's baby name. Based off of BibleStudy.org, the meaning of 12 is perfection, completion of the authority of God, the perfect foundation for government. And the X at the beginning, while typically mentioned as the unknown, it could also mean X marks the spot. Or if X means the Roman numerals, the number 10 in the scriptures can also mean completeness of order. Okay, now we are ready. Basically, by using these letters and numbers and using all the definitions and meanings outlined above, this name is saying X marks the spot, the object of love. I am the official complete order, the perfect archangel having God's authority and power, the perfect foundation for government. No, not saying this for myself in any way whatsoever, and I'm not trying to push that forward by saying it. The audacity any entity could say this, let alone name their child this, while knowing Yahweh is watching, is just beyond comprehension. But notice how in saying the definition, you can almost still hear artificial intelligence in the phrase. So basically, AI is really code name for the chief of the spirits of the fallen ones. Phew. How ironic to have come across all these connections when researching probably the least technologically inundated group of ancient people possible to even look into. So what is the bottom line? On a hopefully lesser level, to make sure our devices are covered in Yahusha, Jesus' blood, and prayer, so they are not open portals or even windows through the veil for the fallen ones. They called it windows for a reason, right? Oh my goodness.
With a magic mirror as his only window to the window to window to
And on a monumentally more important level, we need to repent. Get to know Yahweh the Creator before it is too late, and make sure you are under the covering of his son Yahusha. People think that Yahweh has duality, but this is false. As scripture says, Yahweh is only good and light, and there is no darkness in him. So what is this duality people think they sense? Here is the mystery of this quote-unquote duality. If you are his, he is your greatest savior. If you are against him, he will be your worst nightmare. Not the devil, ironically. And Sasquatch learned this the hard way, unfortunately. And so then, who are the Sasquatch? Well, in my opinion, they were and are our ancient brothers. Thank you all for joining me. This turned out to be much longer than I intended, but indeed everything is so connected on this beautiful, great tapestry, and what an adventure our lives are turning out to be.